Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another EarthFest virtual lecture. We're very excited for this talk. I am Benjamin Zuckerberg. I am a professor in Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, and I'm also serving as the director for the Center for Ecology and Environment here at UW-Madison. Just as sort of a brief overview, the center provides an important nexus for ecologists on campus, both graduate students and faculty, to share ideas and enhance scholarship. We represent over 26 actually individual departmental units, and we have over 80 affiliated faculty here on campus. And one of those affiliated faculty are joining us today, and we're lucky to have him. Dr. Min Chen is an assistant professor in Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology here at UW-Madison. Dr. Chen earned his PhD in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences from Purdue University. He received his master's in remote sensing and GIS and his bachelor's in computer sciences from Beijing Normal University in China. His postdoctoral journey included appointments as a fellow at Harvard University and a Barbara McClintock Fellowship at the Carnegie Institution for Science at Stanford University. His research primarily uses computational modeling to examine the impact of climate change and human activities on terrestrial ecosystems, focusing primarily on their interactions with the carbon cycle and feedback mechanisms affecting both human and Earth systems. His talk today will be on rising methane emissions from boreal Arctic wetlands. And perhaps as a suggestion, I would ask that everybody just kind of keep their video off, keep themselves muted, of course. But if you do have questions, feel free to enter them into the chat space. And at the conclusion of Dr. Chen's talk, we can definitely do our best to answer them. So without further ado, I hand you over to Dr. Min Chen.
All right. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Ben. Does everyone hear me okay? Just want to make sure. So Ben, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Great. Nice. So good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to meet a group of people like you here, which I think you are deeply committed to loving and caring for and protecting our beautiful planet Earth. And I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share our group's recent research findings with you in this special occasion and the special week to celebrate the Earth Day of 2024. And today, I'll discuss methane, I think, which is a chemical I believe most of you are familiar with. For example, I think you are likely see it at home in the form of natural gas. And methane is, in fact, is a primary component of natural gas, which plays a critical role in industrial production and our daily lives as well. So the theme of this year's Earth Day is about plastics. Actually, methane is used for plastic production as well. And Lars, who lives in America's Dairyland, and probably many of you have noticed this odor around cattle as livestock release methane through the burping and farting. And for people who lives in big cities, and you probably have opportunities to drive past a landfill, you might have already detected some similar smell due to the methane emissions. And you might even have heard it. So I'm not sure if you can recognize this figure in this slide. Actually, is aerial photo of the University Bay, just not far from us, from my office, and which actually includes a range of wetlands, including the class 1918 marsh, if I remember correctly. So actually, when I bike past this area for commuting, particularly in summer, I can actually hear the distinct bubbling, which is also a signal of methane. But I want to clarify that methane itself is odorless and colorless, and its visibility comes from its flammability, and the smell is due to the other gas mixed with it. Don't want to confuse you. But for me, as someone deeply concerned with climate change and devoted to studying our climate system, what really draws my attention to methane is its role as a potent greenhouse gas. The molecular structure of methane makes it highly effective at absorbing infrared radiation, which we know as a core physical mechanism of greenhouse gas effect. And that effect gives it substantial global warming potential. So studies have shown that like over the time scale of like 20 years, the methane's impact is about 83 times greater than CO2, our first, the most well-known greenhouse gas. And that unit is about 30 times over a 100-time year period. So probably some of you would ask, what's the difference? Why is it's 83 times over 20 year period and it's 30 times over 100-year period, which is just due to the methane is being a reactive gas. It can actually have a lot very complex chemical reactions with other chemical components in the atmosphere. So it has a shorter atmospheric time span than CO2. So it has a less impact over the time. But at the same time, because of the atmospheric chemical reaction, it actually contributes a lot to the atmospheric pollution, but it's not our topic today. In fact, climate change is marked by significant change, more specifically increase in atmospheric methane concentrations. So the chart on the left is developed by NASA using data from EPA, shows a historical record of methane levels going back to hundreds of thousands of years, as you can see here. And yeah, you can see that methane concentrations remain pretty stable for a long time, hundreds of thousands of years, but began to rise dramatically starting in the 18th century. And this uptake correlates with increased agriculture activities, waste production, and the production and the use of fossil fuels, and all contributing to the rapid growth of atmospheric methane concentrations. And the figure on the right actually show the recent global monthly mean methane emissions measured from our globally distributed sites. As we can see, the methane concentrations in the atmosphere shows a clear increasing trend from 1980s to 2020. This is actually the figure I draw from NOAA's website yesterday. So you can see the most recent methane concentration is about 1920, if I remember correctly, 28 parts per billion. So, the increase of methane, according to the intergovernmental panel on climate change of the United Nations, methane has been made the second significant greenhouse gas driving the recent climate change. So it's actually, if you count the amount of methane molecules in the atmosphere in comparison to CO2, it's only like 0.5% of CO2's concentration, but it's responsible for about 25% of those warming attributed to CO2. This disproportionate impact underscores critical role of methane plays in our climate system and highlights urgent need for understanding the change of those methane in the atmosphere and of course the strategies to mitigate its release. Yep, and to effectively manage methane emissions, a thorough understanding of the global methane cycle is essential. So we need to identify the sources and quantify how much methane is emitted from each of those sources. And the diagram on the right offers a clear summary of this cycle. I really like it. It's from the European agency called ECMWF. The primary sources including, as you can see, from fossil fuel production and use, agriculture, including the dairy industry, and burning biomass, including the wildfires, and landfills, which is the waste we are producing every day, and some other natural resources, including geological and like animals. And the methane emissions also come from wetland and rice. And that's primarily represent the natural methane emissions. It's often just occur in the environments with limited oxygen, for example, like permafrost thawing and wetlands. And we know there's lots of complex interactions between the carbon and the microbes and take place. Understanding the sources is crucial, but quantifying methane flux from large areas like big landfill sites in the Dane County and or the across the state of Wisconsin is also important work, but that presents significant challenges today. We can definitely measure methane emissions directly from small locations in the lab or detecting a leak from a pipe or using an eddy current flux tower to measure methane flux from over a small area. But it's much, much harder to directly observe the flux over large regions, for example, Dane County and the whole Wisconsin state. So to address this challenge, the scientists have developed two major approaches for estimating methane fluxes over large areas, namely the top-down modeling approach and the bottom-up approach. So the top-down approach involves using methane concentration measurements from satellite. So we have satellite sensors or airborne. We fly airplanes to measure the methane concentrations in the atmosphere, or some ground-based sensors. And those measurements coupled with inverse computing models to assess how much methane must have been emitted to result in the observed atmospheric levels. And that takes the wind patterns and chemical reactions into account. In contrast, the bottom-up approach relies on detailed understanding of the processes causing methane emissions. It uses data like maps of wetlands or like landfills or the oil and natural gas factories, and also use different ways to estimate emission rates of those sites or those locations. And we calibrate them with data at small scales and then upscale to larger regions. So there's a difference of these two main processes, top-down and bottom-up. And I have an analogy for the bottom-up and top-down approaches if this feel too complicated with you. And imagine you're organizing a large school party and you need to determine how many snacks are needed provided at the party. So you could use a bottom-up approach, starting by asking each class representative to count the number of students in their class who will eat snacks, right? And then we aggregate the numbers for the entire school. Then you know how many snacks you want. Or a top-down approach would involve estimating based on past events that typically, for example, 75 of school students attend and eat snacks. Then, so adjusting this figure based on observations during the party, say, hey, there's more students come in, so we probably want to get a little bit more. And if there's less showing up, probably, okay, the total will be less. And both approaches have their own merits, as you can tell. The bottom-up approach is well detailed and relies on accurate local data, but top-down approach offers a broad perspective refined by specific known factors, and it actually can really relies, uh, yeah, it can take advantage of the widely covered continuous measure of the atmospheric methane concentration data. Yeah, so these both approaches have been used in the global scientific community effort. It's called Global Carbon Project. It's really the cutting edge efforts for quantifying the global carbon budget and, of course, including methane. The global methane budget is a key component of that global carbon project. So the recent release of the budget report is just a few years ago, actually quantifies the decadal methane fluxes from 2008 to 2017 using both bottom-up and top-down approaches. And each of approach involves multiple models and different teams.
That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? That
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So orange color here, as you can see, shows the anthropogenic methane emissions, and the green arrows here shows the natural methane emissions. And you may see there are two numbers along each of these arrows, and they represent the results from the bottom-up and top-down approach resulted estimates. And the range in the parentheses under these parameters represents its uncertainty ranges from the different models belonging to each of these approaches. And I want to draw your attention to 2 points here. The first of all, wetland methane emission is the largest in the natural emitters. And if you look into the uncertainty here, it actually has the largest uncertainty among all the natural sources. And if this figure is probably more complicated, but I believe this 2-box plots drawing the distributions of our estimates of top-down and bottom-up approaches of methane emissions may be more clear. It summarizes the past 2 assessments of global methane budget, including the one in the previous slide, which is the right figure. So this one is for the decade of 2003 to 2012. And yeah, the 2-box plots should bottom up and top down. So in each of them, you can see 2 boxes that's bottom up, top down. And we can see in both assessments, wetland stands out for its significant contribution to the global methane budget and its largest uncertainty among all the natural sources. And interestingly, we didn't reduce uncertainty over the past 5 years between the 2 assessments. As you can see, the results are about almost the same magnitude. And it's key to understand this uncertainty and reduce uncertainty of this methane sources emission because it hinders full understanding of the effects of both anthropogenic and natural emissions and provide us with less unclear clue for our mitigation strategies. Oh, this is not good. So in fact, as a modeler, I'm not surprised by the uncertainty at all. So the figure on the left shows our current understanding of the methane production, consumption, and the transportation processes in wetlands. And as you can see, there's some vegetation activities involved, and that goes into the below ground processes. And the carbon have complex interactions with microbe, and there's some biological and chemical reactions happening. And finally, when methane is produced, some of them will be consumed by oxidation processes. And the last step is there's a few avenues for the methane from the below ground to the atmosphere by, for example, the plant aid transportation, the evolution with bubbling, and diffusion. So please don't look into the details. I just want you to have some sense of how complex the process could be with the involvement of so many physical, biological, and chemical processes. And I also want to say that these processes do not represent the real world, and the real world is even more complex than that. So that means our model doesn't really, we should not expect a model can reproduce the results that we observe from the real world. And more importantly, for model, even with the current complexity, we don't have sufficient observational data to calibrate each of these processes. And therefore, the errors can propagate and accumulate throughout these arrows from the beginning to the end, and finally goes to the estimated methane emissions. And furthermore, I believe most of you are aware of, there are many types of wetlands. And this figure summarizes 4 major types of wetlands here: marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. So if you takes a little bit of time reading the text here, hopefully it's not too small, you can see that this type of wetlands have completely different vegetation compositions, the water acidity, soil nutrient availability, and the structures of the wetlands as well. So that means even if they have exactly the same environmental conditions, meteorological conditions, they may produce completely different methane fluxes. So that means wetland mapping is another important issue in our wetland methane emission estimates. So these 2 maps here shows some of the recent mapping, global wetland mapping results. So as you can see on the left and the right, it represents the long-term maximum wetlands and the mean annual minimum wetlands over the world. And as you can see, the 2 hotspots here. So this one is the Hudson Bay in North America and the Western Siberia area in Russia. And yeah, see, there's quite a bit wetland distributed in the tropical area and some of the middle latitude in the northern hemisphere as well. Yeah, I also wanted to note that the global wetland area has big uncertainty. From the latitudinal distribution figure in comparison with other datasets, so there's multiple datasets has been developed, including the names of Watram, Jim, S2, blah, blah. Just, for example, this paper lists 4 major wetland maps produced in the world. So we can see that the wetland area estimated by the 4 different datasets don't agree with each other. And they don't agree with the magnitude, and some of them don't agree with the latitudinal distribution. Remember, so we typically estimate methane fluxes in the unit of, like, for example, gram or molecular mole methane per square meter or per square kilometer. So it's kind of intensity unit. And we multiplied it by a wetland area and then get the total methane fluxes from the wetland to the atmosphere. But so think about if we have error in the wetland area and how much error we can get from that in our wetland methane emissions, because wetland area is actually the first order determinant of the final methane flux estimates. But anyway, from this figure, we can tell that all data sets agree with each other that the Boreal Arctic, so essentially the northern highlighted area, is presenting the largest wetland area in the world. So our project is designed for a global estimation, but this is the reason that why we really focus on the Boreal Arctic region first. So our approach, instead of traditional process-based bottom-up modeling, so which involves very complicated processes that we have less confidence in calibrating or reducing the error, we use a data-driven approach. So essentially, we use cutting-edge machine learning algorithms, build models that maps the meteorological forcing, remotely sense vegetation dynamics, and other surface properties like, for example, soil pH and wetland mapping type, etc., to the wetland methane emissions. So their relationship is trained by real data, so processes for optimizing the model parameters to minimize the difference between the model predictions and observation. So once the model is trained, we can apply the model with large-scale meteorological forcing, vegetation dynamics, wetland maps, and properties to estimate the large-scale methane emissions, which we call upscaling. So if you're familiar with data-driven model, the core of it is availability of the data. Fortunately, the necessary data we need have been accumulated for a long time, is ready for application. For example, the eddy currents technique has been adapted as a golden standard for measuring land-atmosphere gas exchange, including methane. And the most important step is that effort has been made to build a global network dataset that covers methane emissions measurements for all kinds of wetland types and all over the world. And some of you may have noticed that the site distribution is highly uneven in this map, and there are many sites in the mid-latitudes, but really less in tropical and very high latitudes. And most importantly, in the two hotspots region, we don't have any data there. That's why we used chamber data, which we put a small chamber on the surface and measures the methane emissions, and we have sensor inside the chamber. So since the chamber data is much more, has a longer history and much more abundant than the flux data, considering the spatial distribution. And this could be a good complementary to the flux data. And as you can see, there's multiple chamber data located in the hotspot region. So making our more confident to use this data to do our data-driven approach. So for our study, we have hundreds of site years, as you can see from the bar chart on the right, and that a long time series goes back to 2000, comparing to only using flux tower, the eddy currents flux tower data that only goes back to 2005, and we have better distribution or better coverage of our study region in the Boreal Arctic. Another aspect we thought a lot is about the model itself. So traditionally, we use a data-driven model as a black box. In other words, we don't know what's going on in the model, but we really rely on the empirical relationship or correlation between the variables, for example, the meteorological data and the methane emissions. And those correlation was trained by the data. So, but to make right prediction, we always want to make it, to do the prediction with the correct reason rather than the wrong reason. So we must use causation rather than correlation. for example, it's easy to understand that high temperature causes increase of the ice cream cells as well as the sunburn rate. So, but we cannot say that ice cream cells increase the sunburn rate because of their positive correlation, right? They're just correlated. And of course, if we use ice cream cells to predict sunburn rate, the prediction may be false. Yeah. So for example, if we probably see more ice cream cells in Wisconsin, and probably that's even more than like the cells in Texas. We cannot say the sunburn rate here in Wisconsin in summer is more than that in Texas. That's so we actually, if we do that, we actually use the wrong reason to make a prediction that's not reasonable, that's out of our training data. So therefore, we must include the causality into our model. Another important aspect for methane emission is that the current emission may be affected by factors happening in previous time steps. And the time lags in different processes could be different. For example, it may take some time to vegetation to absorb carbon that will be converted to substrate for methane production and then finally emission. That's time usually takes from days and to weeks. But the temperature, the impact on the methane diffusion usually happens immediately. So we must have a model structure taking care of the time lag and different time lags and allows models smart enough to automatically take the time lag effects into its prediction. And that's why we use a model structure called attention augmented long short-term memory, a deep learning method to reflect the time lagging mechanism. So together, we built a causality guided machine learning called causal LSTM to perform our research and finally generate our estimations. So essentially, we use the real data and using a causal inference technique to identify the causal structure or causal relationship between variables. And using that data identified causal relationship as an additional constraint or a term in our loss function or the mismatch between our observations and predictions in our training processes to make sure our model can make the right prediction with the right reason. And here we show some preliminary, pre-estimation examination of the different types of models. For example, the LSTM model without the causality constraint and our causal LSTM and observations derived the causal relationship between the drivers or the predictors and the methane emissions. Just take a look at the pattern. The color represents the feature importance, identifies the causal inference, and the red means the driver on the left side has a more predicting power on the methane emissions. So as you can see, the patterns of the causal LSTM matches the observations pretty well. But if you don't include the causality relationship, if just using LSTM, although it captures time lag, it doesn't capture the right causalities between the predictors and the methane emissions. And we also want to see what the impact of the causality. We did a theoretical soil warming experiment, and we can see that, yeah, we know that the soil warming will increase methane emissions. And so we apply the model, the causal LSTM and the LSTM without causality constraint, we found that the methane response with causal LSTM actually captured the expected response, but the LSTM didn't do a good job. Didn't do a good job in terms of that. And the performance of a causal LSTM because of the big amount of data, the well-defined structural model, we found it actually did a really good job in capturing the seasonality and interannual variability of the observed methane fluxes. These are the some of testing results. As you can see, the blue line shows observation and the red line shows the predictions. And you can see it matches each other pretty well. And we make a scatter plot. So if it's closer to the one-to-one line, that means your model prediction and observation are matching each other. As you can see, using statistical called the coefficient of determinant and the correlation coefficient, we found that both pretty high. 0.88 and 0.94 is really good, good number for confident methane emission model here. And also compared our approach to some other widely used models, like for example, I'm sorry for the abbreviations here. The RF is random forest, decision tree, DT, and support vector machine, SVM, artificial neural network, ANN, long short-term memory, LSTM, and finally our causal LSTM. Left figure shows the correlation coefficient of our estimates with observations, and the right side shows the mean absolute errors between our model estimates and the observations. So as you can see, the causal LSTM consistently have a higher correlation coefficient and lower MAE, the mean absolute errors. So giving us strong confidence to upscale our model to the larger region to make predictions of the big area methane emissions, for example, the Boreal Arctic region. I think the most important finding for us is that we found a robust increasing trend of the Boreal Arctic methane emissions in that area. So to make it more robust, we actually tested with different wetland maps and with different meteorological forcings from different agencies around the world. So even use different wetland maps, remember the uncertainty in the wetland maps, and you use different meteorological forcing, we found consistently rising methane emissions in this area. There has been debate about about understanding of the recent methane rising methane concentration in the atmosphere. So we don't directly explain the rising concentration in the methane in the atmosphere methane concentration, but our results here provide robust evidence that at least if you want to consider the reason of the methane concentration rise in the atmosphere, the Boreal Arctic wetland methane emissions probably is an important factor to take into account. And we also see the two hot spot regions here, especially the Hudson Bay area and the West Siberian area. And another point is that what drives the increase of wetland methane emissions in the Boreal Arctic area? Is it because of wetland changes? We have witnessed a lot of wetland changes in the past decades because of climate change, drying or flooding. So the wetland is highly dynamic. Or is it because of the vegetation dynamics, or is it about the temperature? So we first excluded the wetland extent contributions. So here the yellow line or the gold line here shows the wetland area changes into over the past two decades from 2002 to 2021. Actually, we don't see an increase of the wetland area and actually we see a slightly decreasing trend with a slope of negative 0.002 over the past 2 decades. So remember, first the wetland area contributes to the wetland to the methane emissions in the first order. So it's not possible that a decreasing wetland will contribute to increasing methane emissions. And we did a set of experiments using temperature, considering temperature changes, considering the gross primary productivity, which represents the photosynthetic rate or vegetation activities, and also the water, the soil moisture contributions. So we turned the changes on and off, and we finally identified the relative contributions of the temperature, the gross primary productivity, GPP, and the soil moisture, and some other factors to the changes of or the changes of wetland methane emissions in our study area. So we found that temperature is actually the factor that dominating the increasing trend of methane emissions, followed by the GPP and the water factors and other factors. So GPP is we're not surprising that the GPP is the second largest because GPP itself is actually positively responding to the temperature as well. So the fundamental contributing factor is the temperature. So if we look at the maps, so 2016 is a strong El Nino year, and we found that temperature in this area is much, much higher than the long-term mean. And you can see the 2 hotspot regions as also have a much warmer record than the average. That has resulted in the hotspot regions of the Western Siberia lowlands and the Hudson Bay lowlands here area have a very strong methane emission in 2016. And if we put our results into the global methane budget estimates, and where are we? And here, the blue estimates represent ensemble mean and the uncertainty from the different top-down models estimates. And the gold lines and the shaded area indicating the bottom-up model estimates results. As you can see, our model estimates is a red line here. It's actually right between the top-down and bottom-up approach. I'm not saying this is definitely locating in the middle of these two approaches is absolutely right. But that actually gives some hint for the bottom-up and top-down community to rethink about their estimates. And the right figure shows the trend versus the annual mean methane emissions, and the red dots here is our estimates. And we can clearly see that the top-down approach, which represents the blue symbols, actually overestimates, comparing to our study, overestimates the trend of emissions and the magnitude. And those yellow to orange symbols here indicate the bottom-up approaches, and they tend to underestimate the trend, both the trend and the methane, the total methane emissions. So that gives us important important suggestion that if we are using the global methane budget estimates of the methane emissions, we probably want to really consider the uncertainties associated with the data when we make the strategies or decision making for mitigating the climate change using methane as a pathway to using methane as a pathway for that purpose. I think it's about the time, so I think it's good to share some take-home message now. I think that I want you just 2 sentences for this study. Substantial increase in trend of methane emission in the Boreal-Arctic area wetlands and making it an important contributor to change of methane concentration in the atmosphere. And second, that the warming of northern latitudes that drives the increase of methane emissions, not the wetland extent change. That's especially important because we know like a climate cycle here. So the warmer temperature increasing more methane emissions, and the more methane emissions actually because of greenhouse gas impact, it will in turn increase the air temperature. Increase the air temperature again, and this air temperature will influence the methane emission. So that's endless cycle until a tipping point that the Earth may experience some really bad climate disaster. Last, I want to acknowledge my collaborators, Qing Zhu from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Gavin McNichol from University in Illinois, Chicago, Kunxiao Jiayuan from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and Fali from my lab. And they are really the people who take the heavy lift, and I'm just the people standing on stage in this occasion. And last thing making me thinking about is Wisconsin idea. What we know, Wisconsin and nearby Minnesota as well, we have a lot of wetlands. And at the same time, we are the dairy land of America. We are emitting a lot of methane from our dairy industry as well. So I think at some point we probably facing the challenges of making policies or strategies for mitigating our climate. And so what the methane emissions from Wisconsin wetland, I think that's an important quantification that has not been finished yet. And that can be, with this research, I think that could be easily done. And using the wetland maps produces, I know, Geography department actually have a map on that. And that's it. I really, I'm really happy to share this research with you. And if there's any question, I'd be allowed to interact and answer. Ben.
Great, thank you, Min. That was a fantastic talk. And I'm just opening it up to anybody who wants, that they can certainly add any questions they have to the chat space. We do have a couple of minutes here, so I'm sure Min would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Min, I actually have a question
Yes.
If you don't mind. I was kind of curious about that soil warming experiment where you're doing it, you're kind of mentioning the importance of these different kinds of wetlands in terms of methane production, like bogs and so forth. And I was kind of curious a couple of things. That one, you show that if I read the graph right, that when you do this warming experiment, that, like, for example, I think bogs was kind of the one that really showed this response. Right. No, thank you. And I'm just kind of curious about the differences between these wetlands in terms of how they respond to temperature. Why would that be the case where you'd see this very strong difference between bog, fens, marshes, and wet tundra? And then secondly, is that incorporated in your model? So I know that wetland area hasn't changed very much, but has the composition of wetland types changed? And could that be also important?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Let me go back to this figure. first. So yeah, you can see the bogs, fens, swamps, and marshes. They all have different vegetation structure, and also they have different carbon storage at the same time. So the bogs have perhaps have the spongy peat deposits and yeah, and with covered with thick carpet of moss. And so it's because of storage of carbon, I think it's getting more. It's not saying that it's more sensitive to temperature, but because of the substrate availability is actually tends to have more methane emissions. And yeah, in response to your questions of modeling for different wetland types, we indeed develop different types of models for different wetland types. So different wetland types have their own methane emission model. So we have wetland maps. That's a classification of the wetland types. So we first estimate the methane emission intensity for each grid cells over the big regions, and we multiply that estimated flux intensity and the area for each wetland types, and then get the methane emissions total for each wetland types, and then summarize together, get the total wetland emission. But that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was kind of curious about, the fact that even though the wetland area may not be changing, the composition, whether it's marshes or bog or fens, could certainly have this, important impact, and based on that warming experiment. So that was great.
And I see a question from anonymous participant from Q&A. How do you deal with out-of-domain error and issues when using these models? How does that look like here? So I guess you're asking question regarding this figure. I'm not sure. So if you're asking this, yeah, that's a really good question, and we don't know. We don't have a good answer for that, actually. So people intend to use the ensemble mean to represent the truth, but we know it's not the truth. That's probably our best estimates. And we must note that these models, process-based models, are typically calibrated or optimized at a certain small amount of locations. So that cannot match the whole observation data as well. That's why we think our data-driven approach that take advantage of almost all available data sets in the world, so that can match the observation data well. So we have more confidence to say that our estimates is probably closer to the truth. Yeah, how can we follow up with your research and stay involved in the conversation and your findings? Yeah, thanks for your interest, and I think you can reach out to me via email, and you can follow I have a Twitter account. You can just follow it and just search, I think, a few M's and Chen. That's the, and I'm running a global change research lab in the department. So just if you go to globalchange.cals.wisc.edu, and you probably can just follow we typically just put our research updates there, so you can just follow our research there. Okay. Oh, there's a few in the chat box.
Yeah, man, I can't see the Q&A on your side, but just hear a question from Melanie asking about, were the species living in the area over time accounted for?
Species living in the area over time.
Yeah, maybe getting to the composition component, like in terms of change.
Yeah. I think, I agree. That should be important because different species actually have Honestly, I don't know lots of that, but I can think of that as different species have a different, for example, photosynthesis rate and root exudation, and of course some microbial characteristics associated with different species. But in our approach, we don't have that that information at that details level, and as I said, there's we don't have observational data for calibrating or training our model versus that information as well. So we don't include that species information into our model estimates. But maybe in the future.
Sure. I mean, these are pretty remote sites, I can imagine too. So we have another question. Is your research being used in any way for working to reduce methane emissions / climate change?
Yeah, that's really, I have been thinking about this question for a while as well. So if we want to reduce wetland emissions, that means first of all, we probably want to reduce the wetland extent. That's definitely something that we don't want to do that, right? Because wetland has a lot of other ecosystem services, and we can see beautiful birds, and they're home to many birds. And we cannot just say, hey, you are emitting methane, and we don't want it. That's not our goal. And the other parts, something that, for example, we know the temperature really controls the wetland methane emissions. But I think that the first hint we want to control the increasing rate of our air temperature from other ways. Reducing emissions, reduce the use of fossil fuels. And I think another aspect is that we have a good quantification of wetland methane emissions. That means we will have a better estimates of the methane emission from other sectors, for example, landfill, fossil fuel. So good quantification of those quantities means we can make better strategy or decision-making processes for reducing emission from that sectors. So I think that's not directly respond to climate change, but it's sort of an indirect way to do the same thing. Yeah, sorry, I cannot think about more approaches or more implications on that, but I'll keep thinking on that. If you have any thoughts, please share with me as well.
Great. Thanks, man. Well, as I see us approaching the top of the hour, just wanted to thank you for your fantastic talk. You're getting lots of accolades in the chat room. People really did love it. And so thanks, Min. And thank you all for coming and participating today. Hope you enjoy the rest of EarthFest. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben Hansen, everyone.